Hi, this is Mrs. Marita. Welcome to section 7.4, Factoring Polynomials. Today's lesson is on the greatest common factor. All right, if you would turn to page 150 of your student companion book, let's first define what this greatest common factor is. Now, you might have seen this before with numbers in a previous class, but now we're looking at the greatest common factor, or GCF, of a polynomial. A greatest common factor, or GCF, of a polynomial is the largest term that could include a number and or variable or variables that goes into every term in the polynomial. Let's do a quick recall of the GCF when we're looking at just numbers. Consider the three numbers, 15, 45, and 90. One way that we looked at GCFs in previous courses would be to do a factor tree. So my 15, I can break this down into a 3 times 5. And then my 45, well 45, that's a 9 times 5, and 9 could be a 3 times 3. And then last, my 90. 90, I could do 9 times 10, 9 is my 3 times 3, and 10 is my 2 times 5. And so we have our three numbers, the 15, 45, and 90. If we write these out, our 15 is equal to 3 times 5, 45 is equal to 3 times 3 times 5, and then our 90 is equal to 2 times 3 times 3 times 5. This is multiplication, so you really could write this in any order. And now we're looking at what they have in common. Looks like each of these terms has at least one 3, so a 3 in common, and then also a 5. Now the last two terms both have another 3, but 15 does not. So in this example, my GCF is that 3 times 5. My GCF then is 15. Notice that also happened to be one of our values. That's just a coincidence. Now let's look at example 1. Find the greatest common factor. Number 1 is asking us to find the GCF of the terms of each polynomial. I'm going to set this up similarly to how we did this with the numbers. My first term is the 15x squared. You could do a factor tree, but I know my 15 is just a 3 times 5. And then my x squared I can write as x times x. Next, my 18. You might need to do a factor tree for your 18. This would be 2 times 9, and 9 is just the 3 times 3. So I can work this out as 2 times 3 times 3. Again, we're looking for what these terms have in common, and in this example, it's only the 3. My 15x squared also has a 5 and an x and another x, but none of those show up with my 18. And so my final answer for the GCF is just 3. Now let's look at example B. We're going to set this up the same way. So we have our three terms, negative 18 y to the 4th, 6 y cubed, and 24 y squared. With the negative, I'm going to pull out that negative 1. And now my 18, we saw that up above, 2 times 3 times 3, and then we have 4 y's. For my 6 y cubed, I have 2 times 3, and then 3 y's. Remember, y cubed, y times y times y. My 24, this one you might need to do a factor tree. We have a 2 times 12, and then 2 times 6, we'll go sideways, and a 2 times 3. So for my 24, I have 2 times 2 times 2 times 3, and then 2 y's. Just like before, I'm looking for what all three terms have in common. So it looks like each term has a 2, each term has a 3, no more 3's or 2's to share, and then for the y's, my y squared is the smallest number of y's, but all terms have at least 2 y's. So you can see for all three of these terms, I have a 2, a 3, a y, and a y. A 2, a 3, a y, and a y. a 2, a 3, a y, and a y. And so I can write my GCF is equal to, we'll combine the 2 times 3, 2 times 3 times y, and so we end up with 6y squared. So the GCF of those 3 terms is 6y squared. Example 2, factor out the greatest common factor. For example 2, we want to factor out the GCF from each polynomial. What we did in example 1 now will just be our first step. So step 1, find the GCF. And then step 2 is to factor out the GCF. So let's look at part A. In part A, we're going to set this up the same way. Some of you may do this in your head, and that's great. That's good for your brain. But when in doubt, write it out. We've got x cubed. We can write this as x times x times x. 5x squared. 5 times x times x. And then 22, negative 22x. So it'd be negative 1. And then 22 is just 2 times 11. 2 times 11, and then times x. So if we're looking for the GCF, the only term that all 3 have in common is x. So if this was like example 1, we'd say our GCF is x, and we'd be done. But that's not our final answer. This was just step 1. And now for step 2. For step 2, we need to factor out the GCF. So what we're going to do is write our answer in a way that you have a GCF, and then you have parentheses with what's left over. So in our example, our GCF was x, and then what's left over? Well, in the first term, x times x. This is my leftover part. So I have an x squared left over. In the next term, I have a 5 and an x, and we were adding, so this is positive, so I have a plus 5x. And then last, negative 1 times 2 times 11, that's my negative 22, so minus 22. This is a factored out GCF. You have your GCF, and then this is what's left over. Now let's try part B. So in part B, I'm going to write these out. Negative 16 y to the 6th, 28 y to the 4th, and negative 20 y cubed. And so negative 16, I've got negative 1, and then 16 is 4 times 4, or 2 times 2, that's the first 4, and then another 2 times 2 for the second 4. Oh my goodness, y to the 6th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those are all y's. They're kind of sloppy. Let's see. And then for my 28, this is 4 times 7, and 4 is just 2 times 2, and then times 7. And then here I've got 4 y's. And then negative 20, I have negative 1. And 20 is 4 times 5, so 2 times 2 times 5, 4 times 5, and then times y times y times y. So in this example, when we're looking for what's in common, it looks like each term has 2 2's in common. If you were doing this in your head, maybe you would recognize that they all are divisible by 4. So 4 is going to be part of our GCF. 2 times 2, or we can write that as 4. And then for the y's, 1, 2, 3, that's going to be the largest number of y's that go into all 3 terms. So 4y cubed is my GCF. But we need our factored form. That's our final answer. And so our factored form, we pull out the GCF for y cubed, and then we find what's left over. Negative 1 times 2 times 2, so negative 4, and then y cubed. Next, and then we've got a 7 and a y, so that's plus 7y. And then last, negative 1 times 5, that's it there, so minus 5. So when I factor out my GCF, for example 2, part B, that's my final answer. And that's it for section 7.4. Make sure you copy down all your notes and bring your questions to class.